Welcome back to the afternoon session, and please welcome on stage Andrew Busch, economic futurist.
Turmoil in the Middle East, 2024 elections, energy transition. It seems like the world is coming at us so hard and so fast that sometimes it's hard to stop and think, how did we get here? It's even harder to understand where are we going. But the good news is today, humbly stated, I'm going to help you with this. I'm Andrew Busch, economic futurist at andrewbusch.com, where we create a lot of research on energy, the markets, politics, the economy. And in my 40 years of doing this, what I've discovered that's missing from most presentations is context. In other words, if you don't know where you've been, you certainly can't figure out where you are, and you will never see where you're going. So that's what we're going to do today. That's the spine of my presentation. We're going to do an economic past, present, and future so you can see growth opportunities. And to do that, let's jump into the past right away. I want you to use your ears. That is the sound of COVID. That is the sound of the global economy shutting down. That is the sound of an airplane not taking off. The sound of a truck not going down the highway. The sound of a car not starting. It is the sound of no bids in the oil market and oil going to minus $40 a barrel. That is economic silence. And I'm here to tell you today, the good news is, of course, is that we're never going to do that again. We've learned a lot globally about shutting down economies, and we will never do that again. I'm also here to give you some good news that our economic silence did not last long. This is Dhaka, India. It is one of the loudest places on the planet. At street level, it's the sound of an airplane taking off. That is the sound of the global recovery. Between all of the central banks around the world cut interest rates dramatically to 0 and below, and then many countries fiscally stimulated. And people went beyond that. The EU actually did something amazing. They issued joint bonds for the first time, and that's fantastic, creating truly a fiscal union instead of just a currency union. In the United States, between Congress, the president, and the Federal Reserve, they made available 14 with a T trillion dollars to stimulate the economy. All of that created tremendous economic growth. In the United States, in the second quarter of 2020, we went from minus 35% GDP to plus 30%, and we kept growing for a very long time. Now, I will tell you that's great news. It also created a lot of problems. Let me give you some economic context about economies, right? Many economies are based upon consumer spending. If we look at consumer spending in China, it's only 37% of their economy. In the EU, it's 52%. In India, it's 60%. And in the United States, it's 70%. Of that 70%, 70% is spent on services and 30% is spent on goods. But if you can't go to a bar, if you can't go to a restaurant, if you can't go out, if you can't take a vacation, that spending on services starts to go down. All of a sudden, you have to work at home. Your spending on goods goes up because you have to buy a table, you have to buy a chair, you have to buy an iPad, and that spending starts to go up. So consumers shifted their spending from services to goods. And then in the middle of that, in 21, we had a new president come in the United States, and they created a $1.9 trillion spending plan on top of 5% economic growth and 0 interest rates. And I'm here to tell you, it was like throwing a lightning bolt right into the global economy. And this is what happened. That is the global supply chain. And that's what happened. It cracked significantly. As an example, container ship costs went from $2,000 to $20,000. So a lot of inflation was generated because of that. So as we look into the global economy, we knew back in 21 into 22, all of a sudden we were beginning to see a lot of inflation. And then, of course, we had what? The Ukraine war break out. And energy prices soared. And, of course, this led to a significant shift. We had monetary policy move from very easy to very tight very quickly. We had consumers shift from spending on goods back to spending on services as the global economy opened up. And of course, we've seen significant shifts down in inflation since these central banks have raised interest rates. As a matter of fact, not only have we seen a shift down today in inflation, but we've seen a shift down in global GDP as well, as things have slowed down because the cost of money has gone up so much. Now, granted, China's had a very different experience with the similar outcome. If you think about China, they did not shut down their economy back in 2020. Yes, they quarantined certain sections, but that was it. And then they benefited dramatically from the demand increase in all of those goods. So in 2020, 2021, 2022, China's economy grew rapidly. And that's fantastic. But China had some problems going on, certainly in the property sector. And then to deal with the Omicron virus that broke out in the end of 2022, they quarantined large sections of their economy. And many economists were believing that when they reopened into 2023, we would see a surge in demand, right? We would see a surge in their demand for energy specifically. It didn't happen. Think about what I just said a minute ago. China's economy, only 37% of it is based on consumer spending. And when that consumer is closed down, they don't feel really good about spending money, and especially if they're losing money in the property sector. So you think about the shift that's occurred for China. Not only did we have a shift away from goods to services, but we also had a shift in the cost of money, and GDP globally started to slow down. At the same time, a property crisis has really developed and really hit its zenith today with Evergrande being liquidated, or they hope. So the hope was that we would see China increasing in GDP, and that did not happen. Now, there's another hope, too, and that's the hope coming from the OECD. This is their growth perspectives for GDP globally for 2024 and 2025. As you can see, they don't have a global recession in there. But I will tell you this, there's a problem. And this is the part of the program where I'm going to give you my big economic secret. Ready? Here it is. Most economists are awful at predicting the economy. They're terrible, right? Even Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon has said the Fed economists are terrible. Now, in fairness to them, I will say they work really hard at their economic models, right? And they have very prestigious degrees and PhDs from universities all over the world, but they're missing something on their models. It's something I call the X factor. This is the uncertainty factor that you put at the end of your model, so a minus sign and then an X. And the more uncertain you are, the bigger that X is, the less uncertain, the less, right? There's a lot of things to be uncertain in this world, right now especially. Now, I want to give you another secret. In 2007, I wrote a book called World Event Trading. Here's the secret. No one read this book. Nobody read it. It came out during the global financial crisis, and sadly, it was pushed away. But 16 years ago, the first 5 chapters were on infectious disease outbreak. The next chapters were on disputed elections. The next chapters were on short-term war, and the next chapters are on big climate events like tsunamis. That's why I call myself an economic futurist. Those are what I call the X factors that are out there. Now, I'm going to put up a slide here. I don't want you to look at it too closely because there's a lot of bad news up there, but these are my X factors. And you can see the biggest one that I have up there, and I made this presentation up quite some time ago, is the Chinese property crisis, which is through all of the headlines today. To me, that is my biggest worry for the global economy, and certainly the biggest worry that I have for global energy markets, because China is not going to come back strongly. They have been, for years, trying to shift their economy away from investment and away from infrastructure to consumer spending, and they have not really been successful as of yet. And I don't expect them to be successful going forward as far as that shift goes, and certainly when they're dealing with the property crisis. Just remember, in the United States, from 2007 to 2008, we had a property crisis of our own. It took us 5 to 10 years to come out of that. So that's what I want you to think about going forward. Okay, with that in mind, let me talk about something else that occurred during COVID that continues to impact us this day when it comes to the global economy, and it's this. There's a shift in the outlook of how people view the world, how countries view the world. They are shifting from focusing on their economic needs to focusing on their political wants. Think about this. Back during COVID, what happened was countries turned inwardly to deal with the COVID crisis, and they learned something dramatic, and that was most of the medical production of goods came from China. And that was a big concern because China initially shut down in February and March, and many countries could not get access to medical equipment or test tubes or whatever. And so countries began to think, hey, we need to produce this domestically. And so they started to think, we need to de-risk away from China to develop our own manufacturing, or to friend-shore. That's another term that's used for this. So countries are trying to bring manufacturing back to their own countries to eliminate this risk. That's a great thing to do to some extent. The EU, US, Canada, Australia are all trying to do these things. Now, with that, of course, comes consequences. If you think about it, there really isn't anymore a global champion for free trade. That has gone by the wayside. As a matter of fact, we're seeing tariffs being used more and more on things coming from China or going into China. So that is a problem. And as we think about supply chain wars, this is where it's emanating from. The United States, as an example, has decided that it's a good idea to limit the amount of semiconductor chips going into China. At the same time, China said, hey, maybe we should limit the amount of rare earth metals that are being refined here going outside of the country. And that's a problem overall for everyone in this room to some extent because it raises the cost of everything and really is very economically inefficient. Perhaps it's a political want. For certain, it's not an economic need at this point. And with this, that tension between the United States and China has opened up an opportunity for what we call economic swing states. This is India, Indonesia, and even the EU has an opportunity to triangulate between the United States and China, fulfill their own political wants, fulfill their own economic needs while staying above the fray to some extent. They can side with the United States on certain issues, side with China on others, and really fulfill what they need. Fascinating development. This whole change in political wants versus economic needs is very different from what we've experienced overall over the last truly 30 years. All right, let's put this all together and let's talk about where I see growth opportunities. And these should not come as a surprise to anyone, but let me catch you through the sequence of what I see here. On climate mitigation and adaptation, mitigation, we're talking about different energy sources. It's so important to really build out these energy sources overall, to develop these new technologies that are there. Obviously, hydrogen is one of them. Carbon capture is another one. These are great examples of beginning new technologies, not really new, but technologies that are going to need serious infrastructure to get them to market. Now, on that, we see something that's really important when we're talking about demographics in the world. What do we know? Well, at my firm, we just did this whole big study on the world's demographics between China, EU, Japan, and the United States. And what we've discovered is this, is that the working age population in almost every one of these countries is going down. So in other words, we're losing people to retirement. It's a graying of the world. In the United States, that working age population is very, very flat. So what does this mean? It means that if you want to grow your economy, you have to increase productivity. I mean, GDP is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. It's the number of workers times productivity. And if the number of workers is going down, then productivity better be going up or you're going to be flatlining or going down for GDP. And that's where AI and robotics begin to come in. We need to expand the ability of our workers to be more productive, to be more efficient, to get more out of them. And this is how you do it when it comes to using those two technologies. And the development of robotics is just mind-blowing. It's so much fun to see these, and eventually we'll see them brought to the marketplace. Now, falling out of that, of course, is power generation and distribution. We need a lot more power overall in this world. And it's an all of the above situation. It's hydro, it's hydrogen, it's thermal, it's wind, it's solar, it's nuclear, it's natural gas, and yes, it's even oil for sure. We need an all above situation because why? Because AI, cloud computing, Bitcoin mining, robotics, all of these things, EVs, of course, need a lot more electricity. And if we're going to get down that path, if we're really going to see change As we drive towards electricity, we need a lot more power overall, and we need to make our power grids and ports, as an example as well, more resilient to dramatic heat, dramatic cold, storms, flooding, all of that. So there's a huge opportunity with this to create just wonderful things that are going on. And I think if we create this virtuous cycle between all three of these, we will see non-inflationary growth occur globally, but we'll also meet the demand of the power that we need to really grow the global economy. So today, I hope I've given you just briefly a little economic overview of the past, present, and future so you can see where I believe are growth opportunities overall. I think in the land, here we are in Florence, of Da Vinci and Machiavelli. Certainly, this is a room full of extraordinarily creative people and wonderful people to meet these challenges for today. I'm Andrew Busch, economic futurist at andrewbusch.com. Thank you for having me today.